Welcome, everybody. I'm very pleased to see you all here. If you're here in the Liebling House on our rooftop or in the Zoom or in the Facebook Live, so welcome to the Fifth Facade. So today we have a very special event. This event is actually a collaboration with the Adam Mickiewicz Institute of Poland. And we are actually physically here at the Liebling House rooftop. And I don't know if you can see it through the camera, but just above me there's a canopy which was designed by the Polish artist and architect Jakob Sesenicy with Adas Tuval. Jacob, who was working with us and the Adam Mickiewicz Institute, will speak today as well. But this canopy here is sort of a changing roof that is for itself an event, because every year we will change the roof canopy, and this will be sort of a display. This specific installation here was part of the Republic exhibition that we had here just recently, debating the role of the public space today. Of course, after the corona, the public space is again something that we need to think about. And this event today, dealing with the memory in the public space, is very much connected to this as well. So this year, two of the most predominant Israeli artists dealing with commemoration passed away, Igal Tumarkin and Danny Caravan. So although their legacy does not stand in the center of our event today, it is important to discuss the art of remembrance just nowadays, because maybe we oftentimes take this ethos of a nation which uses monuments in order to tell its own narrative as sort of something that is maybe normal, or we take it as just part of our public space. And maybe today it is again inspiring to think about the way we commemorate in a different or new way. Oftentimes an ethos of a nation uses a monument in order to tell its own narrative, aspiring to create collective identity while promoting a national agenda. Just for an example, the removal of almost 100 Confederate monuments and memorials was made in the United States since the 1960s. The removal has been driven by the belief that monuments glorify white supremacy. Just last year, memorials associated with social injustice following the murder of George Floyd in Chicago, which we all remember, maybe the scene where a white cop was kneeling on an African-American stemming US citizen, and he was murdered because of that. So how does our culture commemorate today, and what do we tell the generations after us when we do a memorial? So this fact and the constant debate about commemoration and its political implementation, as well as their physical manifestation in the public space, stand in the center of our debate today. The entry lecture that we have by Udi Edelman, who will talk about Tumarkin's work, marking the questions of how we use commemoration sites today, in the era where the usage of the public space is much debated. This was, of course, also the core of our exhibition, as I told you before. And the political and social impact on such an act is still in the headlines as we speak. So I think we need to ask ourselves or rethink the way we create monuments today. This discussion today is not only about Tel Aviv and Warsaw, it is also including other cities like Berlin, Chicago, as I just told you, Beersheba and Arad. And it's also not only revolving the Polish-Israeli relationship around the Shoah, but it's rather about the social orders we dictate when we decide to commemorate, and about the layers of the place we choose to collectively remember and hold versus those that we choose to forget. So without further ado, please Udi. You can start, please, with your lecture. And the topic of the lecture is the actual usage of monuments in urban landscape, perhaps different from the original intentions of the creator. The case of Timorkan Memorial and the Rabin Square. So, please.
Hey everybody, thank you for coming here. And I'm gonna talk also about Tomarkin, but basically what I want to do is to give one or two very basic remarks about how I see monuments today and how we use them in public space. So when we think about monuments, most of the time we think about this kind of figure. And about the way that they should be sublime, everlasting, forever. They are there forever, and singular. So they are one of a kind. This is it. This is the one object that we see here. And I will just start with this paragraph from W.J.T. Mitchell lecture about in the name of what do monuments wants from 2014, and he says that they just want to live forever. They don't want to die. They want to survive to defeat death. They don't want to be history. They want to be alive in the present. They are creature of memory. Okay, and so on. If you want to read the rest of it, so monuments are about remembering, about the being here in the present, and making the connection between us and the past. Okay, this is how they are planned to be. Okay. So this is the way that their creator or the people that invited the artists or designers or architects to create them want to think that they work. And many times this is how we think that monuments works, but most of the time they don't work like that. I remember from being a teenager in a city not so far from here. There was a monument in the center of the city. I remember nothing about it. I remember something about the shape of it and the place where it was in the city, and nothing about what it was meant to remind me, but that it was a place of gathering. So it was the place that teenagers meet Saturday night before going to other places. But that's it. So many times monuments are things that we different way that they were meant to be. And this is, I think, a crucial point that I want to talk about. So here are just some few examples from the recent history in Israel. So this is an example of Orthodox children playing in a pool, which is actually a monument. This is maybe more remembered or well known. This is a moment from a series. The monument itself is the Negev Brigade by Danny Caravan. But this moment in this series, in this well-known series, is actually what people are doing there or used to do in this moment. This is just having sex on the monument, but basically this is a place near Be'er Sheva that is well known for people being going there for having bonfire and singing, but also like having sex when you have nowhere else to go and so on. So we use these places in different ways. This is a work by an artist, Camila Jnoch, and already thinking about this possibility of playing games with monuments. So using them again in some very different manner. And this again, a work by Christian Jankowski, a work of art. I wouldn't talk about it today, but just understand this is a moment from a video about this game with the monument and the way that we use how we think about these objects. And of course, these are also possibilities. This is a quite well-known monument in Israel, but that a few times in recent decades got stolen by a metal theft. Okay, and just for that, they don't care about the object itself. They just don't care. It means nothing to them. And I think that this is another moment that is that might look a bit similar, but works completely in a different way. So when do we think about the history of the monument, or the historical moment that the monument should work? Okay, so let's say something like two possibilities. Either it's a ceremony, or it relates to you specifically, that the monument is talking about your own kind of connection to the current history, or it becomes important again as a point of conflict. Okay, so we think again about the history, or the thing that this moment should mention or commemorate, when we don't agree with what it commemorates, when it doesn't work anymore. Okay, so I mean, this is from South Africa, from the Cecil Rhodes demonstrations and removal of statue, which we also remember from the, in a bit a different way, from the post-Soviet Union destruction of monuments. And this is later on for, from the demonstrations against the Confederation in the US. And again, this one, which is also a very interesting story that I will tell you later if you would like. So these are all moments that we think about the history again, but we think about it when we already disagree with it. So then it becomes crucial point to discuss. Okay, so this is the point, because it's a singular place. It's a specific just the historic books. This is a place in public space. These are all already in Israel. Moments that we won't talk about today, but this is like the Turkish soldier monument that you see here. So again, in moments of friction, it becomes a point where you react to, and Rabin monument and so on. Okay. And this is Tomarkin work, and for me this is a kind of another remark that I would like to say about it. This might be one of the most well-known monuments in Israel, for sure. But I guess that almost all Israelis don't really know what it's about and what's the shape of it. You see the shape; it's like an upside-down pyramid, but actually the shape is completely different. It's David Star. David Star that you can see only from the sky or from above, that we'll see in a minute. But it is also a monument for the Holocaust and for the rising against it, or rising afterwards. And this is again about the use that we talked about. So this is a demonstration from about a year and a half ago under the COVID restrictions. So you see this is one of the most important squares in Israel, and you see the David Star now, okay, and the demonstration around it. But more than that, you see this different use here, okay. So then the monument become part of the demonstration. So it's a moment where it is used again in different ways. So it's not at all about what it represents. It represents a crucial point in the city, or a higher point, and a more important kind of venue to demonstrate in. And this is a shape. So okay, so we're talking about the second part of the 20th century, and there it's interesting to say that this moment marks the change from like more figurative monuments and objects that commemorate things. Instead of the figurative, more to modernist, sometimes futuristic. We'll talk about it maybe. Shapes that change the way that we represent what we should remember. So there's no figure anymore, and now it's just shapes in public space. Okay, and it's important because it's more relevant to the public space as it is. It looks very different, but then it takes us farther away from what we should remember. Okay, in a way. Okay, you should want to read about it to understand what's it about. And this Toachim monument is just the one that we chose, but we could have choose other possibilities for this monument. And back in '75, I think there was a few suggestions for this monument. One of them is this one by Tzvi Aldobi. It should have been like this high building with museum downstairs, and for me the best suggestion that wasn't chosen is this one by Pinchas Eshet. Okay, so for me it's very interesting also to think about the other possibilities, how we could have used this space otherwise if this was another kind of monument. And of course, these are the monuments that are most interesting because they're like spaceships, and this is a completely other kind of thing to say about monuments and the way that they are taking us further away from the memory itself, but into the deeper sense of monuments as being singular and out of this place. So monuments as spaceships are the best kind of monuments in their inner sense. So I will leave you just with these kind of other possibilities to think about monuments from outer space. So maybe there. Thank you.
Thank you. This was very interesting. So our next speaker is from Poland, and the one who did this amazing canopy here, Jacob Sansesi. I hope I say your name right, and I hope you're here with us. Yes, I can see you already. So, new commemoration form. From the crisis of the previous forms of memory and commemoration towards a new approach in thinking about commemoration forms. So please, Jacob, let's see if we can hear you. Can you say something? Yes. He looks. Can you hear us, Jacob? Seemingly not. Okay, so let's see what we can do about that. Can you hear us? Yes, great. Hi, Jacob. We're very pleased that you're here with us today. Please start.
I'm not getting any response.
You're not getting any response?
Please start, Jacob.
All right. Hello, everyone. As Beersheba monument by Danny Caravan was put on a table, I'm bringing it back with a couple of remarks also related to the nature of bigness, to what is scale and form in monumentality as related to certain problem that we have of us, that we are stuck in mostly 19th century thinking, but probably it dates back to Neolithic times, which is related to A, need of commemorization, B, need of graduating or scaling the memory. The bigger the event, the more important, according to us, the bigger has to be the monument that represents the memory. The bigger the ceremonies, the rituals, the acts related to this object. this is why we are revolving around the subject of scale and the monumentality of monuments infinitely, especially now in right-wing governed Poland. The manic production of monuments restarted, as it was the case in Poland after World War II. We are now constantly producing different, usually very bad quality, realistic or wanting to be realistic figures, starting with celebrities sitting on benches, going through a number of different positions of Pope John Paul II, finishing with bigger scenes in which a lot is really happening. So the Laocoon group, compared to these fantasies, is really a humble depiction of some mythical scene. Here comes the Negev Brigade Memorial again. It was actually interesting to hear about the sexual reference, because one of the things that comes to my mind is actually that the moment we go into big scale, lots of sculptors, which is not unusual, are going into territory of architecture. The bigger the scale, the more the thinking is of letting people go into the monument. So the monument becomes a set of objects that not only reach para-architectural scale, but in many cases becomes a landscape or even a big interior itself. Therefore, it provides different usages and experiences related to being in the interiors of architectural objects, buildings, in other words. Therefore, what comes in is the control related to this space, because some monuments look fairly abandoned from any control, becoming fantastic spaces for interaction and interpretation for different groups. Informal one related to the most lively ones, like kids, teenagers, or lovers, especially illegal ones, wanting to hide in the bushes, but also hiding in or between the monuments. Warsaw, the city where I live, is actually full of these. So we don't have to go to Negev to have fun. I'm here putting two monuments together, talking about this big scale, though I still have to say that as compared to Supper Memorial by Stanisław Kulon in Warsaw, I much prefer Anya Kaupovic's expression. I also like much more the context. This sort of abstract, grand in scale, but using less realistic language set of forms is really linked to the landscape, and the concrete as a material belongs to it. But we can see different approaches, different traditions in referring to, first of all, to signs and iconography, sometimes universal ones or belonging to local traditions. A big production of bigger than life monuments took place, especially in Armenia during communism. The Bashan Memorial by Raphael Israelian is probably the best example, and it's totally also working in the landscape as a fake object. We don't know the scale of it. This could be Manhattan, even though the sculpture itself was planned as a 30-meter tall object. And then, of course, ex-Yugoslavia, that is full of different explosions of brutalistic commemorations that became an interesting set of objects for people to make photographs, to make photo sessions, especially when it comes to fashion. So this is how the memory, or actually the task of commemorating some specific action or happening or failure from the past is actually secondary as compared to pure formal quality of the object. This is also interesting because many of these objects become out of date when it comes to memory. They simply don't bear anymore the strength that they had in the past because the memory is dying. So the objects that have some interesting sculptural quality become separated from the message, gaining new life as forms, sometimes pure ones, getting sympathy and interest from people by the very form that they represent. I think that the best example of this approach, also the architectural approach, is the Macedonium in Macedonia on Krushevo Hill, where a big battle from World War I was commemorated by two architects, actually. This memorial is an architectural object. We also have to remember that many architects were involved in creating parasculptural. So we are going from architecture into sculpture, parasculptural objects. Sometimes the strategies were not as iconographic, not as suggestive as the Macedonian case. Sometimes they were trying to relate to the very nature of the happening or a person that they were supposed to commemorate. One of the best examples is the memorial space of Gandhi, designed by Charles Correa in Ahmedabad. That looks just like a very humble, shade-giving architecture, and according to the architect, it was supposed to represent modesty of the very Gandhi. The link between architectural and sculptural forms is imminent, especially in the city. And Warsaw, by tradition, with two big uprisings, with the Jewish ghetto uprising and so Warsaw uprising that took place a year after, is a fantastic place to refer to different architectural forms, also some that are quite easily recognizable. But this is also where scale comes in. After 89, different commemorations of Warsaw Uprising appeared. The one that I'm showing here by Vincente Kuchma, standing on the verge of Warsaw's new town, is probably the most popular one. But at the very same time, the winner up till 89 was a small, humble figure, the statue of so-called small upriser by a master sculptor, Jerzy Jarnoszkiewicz. A very small figure that's almost life-size, standing not far from the big monument that I'm showing to the left, that actually became much more iconographic, has much more strength through the very message, through the form, and it doesn't require this much of an orchestrated set of giant forms with lots of expression. The expression is very humble here, and it works as well, if not better, than the one by Kuchma. If you look at Warsaw, it's actually a city of monuments, and the ones that you can find on the road map are the bigger ones. There's actually twice as much available, if you will. Some of them are actually sets of monuments, and the best example is the surrounding of Polin Museum in Warsaw that became a sort of a sculpture park surrounding the Polin Museum, the Jewish Museum of Warsaw, where not only the big monuments of ghetto uprising is standing, but also a number of smaller expressions of different type. And actually, in this space, we can see, which was also referred in the previous presentation, we also see a fantastic conflict between different groups wanting to stamp this space with new commemorations of different scale, character, and story behind. The one to the left on the bottom is representing the commemorating the fighters of Warsaw Ghetto with the entry to or a sculpture representing and referring to the entry to the underground system of sewage, the rain sewage that uprisers, both in Ghetto uprising and Warsaw uprising, were using. We have two monuments commemorating special people and appearances, like Jan Karski and Willy Brandt, which is interesting because in case of Willy Brandt, is actually a symbolic gesture that's represented through a very humble form of a wall, in which we commemorate a moment, actually, that took a couple of seconds, in which Willy Brandt sat or actually kneeled in front of the actual ghetto uprising monument for the first time as a German chancellor, commemorating and saying we are sorry. But this space is also interesting because we have an entire palette of possibilities, from invitation to interaction. People can sit by Jan Karski if they want and make selfies with him. We have the actual big monument with Israeli youth doing different rituals related to singing Anathem and going to the army. And then we have a number of different possible interpretations of these, from sitting on it to being used by skaters, which is also probably a big quality.
Jacob, I'm sorry, we're out of time.
Of Danny Caravan. This is the last project that is interesting
Jacob?
when it comes to the surrounding
Hi.
of Polin
Can you
Museum.
hear me?
Yes, I can.
Unfortunately, we ran out of time. It's 10 minutes for every speaker.
Okay.
So please, I'm
finishing here.
Yes,
and
thank you.
This is the last project that never happened. The project that didn't have a monumental architectural form. The project that was actually a forest nursery commemorating those who saved Polish Jews. A project that was proposed by Gabo Heindl and Edward Freudman, who proposed a process. The forest nursery was supposed to nurse the trees that were later or would be later distributed to places where Jewish life is being reborn in Poland. Why didn't it happen? Because of the sponsor, because he wanted a 19th century commemoration, not an abstract, situationist, almost process-based monument. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jacob. So next will be Beata Szumtowska. I hope I can speak your name out correctly. Activism as a commemoration tool. So Munarov Housing Estate as a memorial, integrating the inhabitants of Munarov in a social ritual. So please, Beata.
Okay, hello everybody. Can you hear me? This is the main
Yes, we can hear you.
And you can see the presentation as well?
No, the presentation
Yes.
is not up.
Okay. Sorry. I think I have to share. Now?
Yes, but yes, please do it full screen. Thank you.
Okay. So, like referring to what Jakub said, I will talk more briefly about the special monumental sort of a monument, which is the whole residential district in Warsaw, and this district is called Muranów, and it has it is both architectural and social phenomena, and also a kind of ritual. First, for everyone who is not from Warsaw and is not familiar with the name, just a brief introduction. What actually we are talking about while talking about Muranów. It used to, before the war, it was called Northern District of Warsaw, or Muranów District. The name sounds Italian, and is derived from the Murano Island, where from Murano Island came influential Italian architect who worked for the Polish kings, and in the 16th century he built himself a residential house there, and that's what is the name. But the main history of the district starts in the 19th century, and it's, as you see on the left side, this is the main street of Muranów, was Nalewki Street. It was mostly inhabited by Jewish residents. 90% of the inhabitants of the district were Jewish residents. And also it was very densely built, so it was a typical 19th century city with tenement houses, not much green spaces, and so on. And then in 1940, it became a part of the Warsaw Ghetto. So you can see on the right side the picture, the photograph from that time. Also, just to locate Muranów in a more Warsaw context, here we see a funny collage done by Tymek Borowski for the Museum of Contemporary Art, and it shows the imaginary skyscraper created from the rubble of Warsaw. As you know, after the Second World War, Warsaw was one of the most destroyed cities in Europe. But Muranów, which constituted about 1/3 of the city center in Warsaw, was in a state of total destruction. Here we can see the aerial photo of Muranów. There was only rubble. The area was about 200 hectares, and it was estimated then from 3 to 4 million square meters there was a rubble field. Sometimes the rubble was even 3 or 4 meters high there. Here we can see the iconic photo with that rubble ruins, with one of the few buildings that preserved the war. Ironically, it was the Catholic Church of St. Augustine, which was not destroyed by Nazis yet because it was used by the storage. And so we come to the Bogdan Lachec, one of the avant-garde architects from the 20s, who came up with that special idea, one of the kind idea, to create the residential district, which will serve also as a monument. So it will have also the remembrance aspect. His project, what you can note, is from 1949. So this whole area was left untouched for more than 3 years after the Second World War. And what is also important to note here is the decision to build something there in the area which used to be the ghetto, and which is still the huge cemetery in the center of Warsaw, was a political decision because because the city of Warsaw was creating like a huge investment, a huge road next to it, and they needed to build something next to it, just not to leave the rubble field. So there was no discussion, which would be probably held today, whether to build there a residential district, like to make people live there, or just maybe a park or administration district, something like that. There was no discussion of that kind. So Bogdan Lachert had to face the main problem, which was the amount of rubble he found on the spot. It was not possible to remove it at that time, so he had to. Like there was the first reason for his concept, which was a residential district for 40 to 60,000 people, was practical. So he decided that he will, on the rubble and from the rubble. This is the main phrase that was repeated at the time in Polish media, and here we can see also some people removing that. Maybe I'll come back to this. Here we can see also Nathan Rapoport's The Ghetto Fighters Monument surrounded by rubble. So the main, because it was not possible to remove that rubble quickly, he decided to use it as a foundation for building new houses. So the mountains of rubble were used like rubble terraces, and on top of that, he decided to build new houses. And what was left under was everything, also human remains, also the cellars of the former houses of northern districts and the ghetto. But his concept had also kind of metaphysical and alchemic aspect, because he wanted that he called this district Phoenix from the ashes. So he wanted to remind everybody about what had happened in the ghetto, about the Holocaust, and that's why the walls of the houses were supposed to stay red, not covered with plasters, just to remind about the bloodshed in the ghetto. And also all the district has to be put on top of the rubble, so it would be visible from afar. And the alchemic concept was using the old, what he meant was using the old material, so that rubble with everything that was in there, to create the new life. So like life, truth over death. We have seen Nathan Rapoport's Ghetto Fighters Monument, and this concept was also used there, because he used the Swedish granite that was initially was meant to use for the Hitler's monument in Berlin. So Lachert also knew that concept, and I think he was also inspired by Nathan Rapoport's monument. But anyway, the most also interesting thing is that ritual aspect, because it included people, living creatures, living beings, the new residents, the new Polish residents of that new district. So Lachert, talking about a new life that will emerge from ruins, needed those people, and in somehow their everyday life, with their presence there, their bodies there, and their everyday activities, somehow they still, now it's more than 70 years, yes, they are still somehow working with that. So it's like a living monument as well. And what I have to say at the end, and I think maybe Gosia and Simon will refer to that also, it has a very profound social applications, because even this project was not finished accordingly to initial plans. People who live there still must face the results of the concept because their life is held there, and they have to, in fact, live every day on the cemetery and be a part of this project. And they were not like volunteering for that because they were just getting flats. It was they just needed some flats, so they lived there. They moved there, so it was not like a choice. I want to live in the cemetery. So that's basically what I wanted to say about the residential district Muranów as a monument, as a memorial project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beata, for this really interesting project. So now Gosha and Simon from the Centrala. Memoryscape, critical tourism, the cut interventions as a socio-spatial inclusion into Warsaw's anthropogenic stratum. So you'll have to explain that to us, Centrala, so please.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Hi. We see you, and now we see the screen, but not the presentation yet. Now it's on. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. We'd like to start our presentation reflecting on the subject of spolia. Spolia is normally like a repurposed matter from previous constructions, architecture of temples, very common in late antiquity. And the funny fact that it's actually, I'm from Rome, so actually I've witnessed the presence of spolias in my city, portrayed, for instance, in the Constantine Arch next to the Colosseum, in which actually, like, you know, the winners will actually reuse the material taken out from the architecture of the defeated as a meaningful display of power, but also as a, you know, pragmatic value of the stone itself. And we decided to, you know, to show you the battleship, the United States battleship, actually created with the recast, repurposed steel used from the wreckage of the 9/11 terroristic attack. So in a way, our lecture is all about like this kind of like a symbolic appropriation of materials and it's and also its pragmatic aspects.
So I was raised there. I mean, I'm the part of the Muranów monument, and we're gonna to share how it impacted our practice. Living in this post-catastrophic city, Warsaw, we understood that we are part of maybe not a monument, but much more a memoryscape, landscape, which is full of different types spatialization of memory. And to navigate in that materiality as architects, we created a map. It's a working map, mostly for us. And after tonight, we're gonna to add some new nice terms like a sculpture park or monument as a spaceship, because this is exactly what this map is about. And in case of Warsaw, we have like many different codified already terms like staged ruin or caged ruin or arrested decay, because living in that materiality is forcing us somehow to conceptualize what we are taking stand for in this battle of narration, because it's a battlefield. It's not only a sculpture park, but it's a battlefield.
So, in fact, in September 2015, we undertook an action exactly on this hill that you see here, the one that Beata was describing as this anthropogenic matter, which is consisting of the foundation on top of which the Muranów district is realized.
but we did that in the intentional way as a project, as a performance, as a part of the residence in Polin Museum, because we witnessed that on everyday basis. I mean, like living in Muranów with every like a building site, you could have a glimpse inside that materiality. And for us, what is crucial in the concept of Lachert is that he wrote that he creating an archive for the future generations, and we are that generation.
Exactly.
So what we did with Ashley Kawaszoglu, the artist, we conducted this cut. We opened up the archive for 1 week with curators from the museum and mostly with our neighbors. In the action, the real archaeologists took part.
You can see him in a picture.
And as well, we talked with Rabbi where we can dig. And mostly we talked with kids who are like attending the school in the next building next door.
This is Ashley Kawaszoglu, which undertook this action with us. And like somehow, like I would like to read you a quote by Jerzy Janowski, the academic who had sort of like a critical assessment of our work. He wrote this. Quote, the sheer mass of found object altered the intended architectural and spatial focus of the dig and compelled its participants to consider questions of archaeological and heritage value, as well as complex anthropological problems surrounding legal, cultural, and ethical ownership. Who, if anyone, has a cultural and ethical right to the rubble of Warsaw? And of course, this question doesn't really have a straightforward answer. So who's the owner of the rubble of Warsaw? Like we cannot really say. Probably everybody or no one.
Few examples from the dig, like from different stratas, let's say, from German hospital and from the pre-war Jewish district. And this is what happened at the end. We put everything back to the archive. So that was our first encounter with the memoryscape in size of landscape. And we understood that that was, of course, it's highly manipulated picture. I didn't know about this intention of Lachert to leave the building without plaster, about this huge manipulation of covering up the story of the place. We rediscovered that fact like a few years ago, not like living in the monument for almost 40 years.
So maybe it's important for you to know that like kind of like the narrative with socialist realism changed like very quickly as the brick looking building were built so fast, so to fulfill the need of housing people in the wake of the ending of the Second World War. Those very brick-looking buildings were named like sad and boring by socialist realist authorities, which wanted to transform them into sort of like a bourgeois palaces, like say palaces for the masses.
And because we understood that we saw that manipulation in front of us, we started to look for other places which can like be the part of memoryscape. This is in fact the Moczydło Hill, built with the ruins and rubbles of Muranów. So not all the rubbles of Muranów stood in site, in situ. That's a big mountain. And actually, landscape architect Alina Scholz used the rubble of Muranów to create a landform, a very smart landform, which is conducting microclimates, water circulation, and is creating a very good space.
Like it's a wonderful public park. So in a sense, like this, Lachert did it like as a housing estate, and Alina Scholz did it as as a stunning park. Here we created the diagram showing how the curve of the hill is kind of like guiding down like rainwater and melting snow towards like a series of basins where the water is collected and overflows from one to another.
So in a way, the materiality of pre-war Muranów is responsible for microclimate of the district. So for us, we are considering it as a co-living with that materiality, and but still, you remember this visualization of the skyscraper. Still, we knew that there is too less of volume. I mean, that was the landscape. So we were like looking for where the rubbles are, in fact.
So, and we started like looking, for instance, like at historical images of the Vistula River, and we realized that actually the Vistula River was heavily narrowed and regulated, especially in the city center of Warsaw. And we learned that this process was happening using the rubbles of Warsaw, like a set of sort of spurs parallel to one another, set at regular distance, was erected, deeping down underwater, ruins laid on reed beds. This would generate basically pockets where the residue of the mud transported by the river would actually collect. So somehow, like together, symbiotically with the river, we narrowed that the course of it.
And now we know where the rubbles are, because our river doesn't look like that anymore. It's highly regulated on this distance.
So when you're thinking about where Muranów is landscape. It's a part of Poland. It's a chunk of the entire country.
Living in the monument is one thing, but we cannot talk about monuments only as the object. We have to talk about memoryscape, or even this mnemonic landscape, because this is you can look at it in the pragmatic way, but still, as Spolia showed to us, it has this. It can be a frame to suspend memory. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. The next speaker is one of ours, Annette Litwin. She is still a resident here in our apartment downstairs, and she will talk about art, memory, and the built environment, the case study of Home-Based Berlin. Please, Annette.
So thank you for having me here, even though this has become my second home. I want to begin with two spoilers. One spoiler. There's going to be two redheads in my presentation tonight. The first is actually the goddess of memory, according to Greek mythology. And she follows many cultural narratives in which there's an idea that human beings arrive to planet Earth knowing everything. And upon landing, they actually receive the seal of forgetfulness. So we're actually here in a journey of trying to remember what we already knew. And this is something shared in many different cultures and myths. So what's special about this goddess is that she's actually the mother of 9 muses. All of them are related to the arts. And there's 2 groups that possess her especially. One of them are kings, who actually depend on memory for their powers. And the other group is poets and artists, who also depend on memory for their powers. I'm going to speak not about the kings who represent power and nationality, but rather about how artists use memory and how that is embedded in the urban landscape. So just to locate my research, I'm an artist turned planner, and I'm looking at the intersection of these 2 fields of art and planning, specifically how they play out in the neoliberal city, and noting that despite the fact that there's been a long history of interaction between art and planning, in recent years, the relationship has become very convoluted, and art has kind of remained on the outskirts of the planning establishment. So going kind of more into detail, basically I created this synthesis of the main tendencies of art planning junctures in the city. And quickly, just to kind of mention 3 key tendencies, which were kind of looked through this prism, a social spatial prism, we find that there's a major tendency in which art is used and exploited by neoliberal agenda, and actually creating economic gain, betterment of real estate, and kind of deployed. The second tendency has to do with social-based art, which has this idea of artists coming to create social reform. Often it's very naively done, and the planning sector has been using social artists as an alibi for participatory processes. So artists come and they kind of create this interaction with the local community, and planners often need this knowledge for kind of covering up on the disconnection to the community. And finally, this is a more maybe contemporary and critical tendency, which is now evolving, where artists have become much more informed about power structures and creating art together with local communities, and basically as a counterculture against the impacts of gentrification and art washing in the city. And you can see that each one has kind of a spatial aspect. So the first one happens in public space and along gentrification sprawl. The second is more in neighborhoods and communal settings. And the third in residential and domestic settings. So I want to share with you a little story that I've kind of used to analyze according to the scale. It's actually not a little story, it's my life. It's a project I've been working on in the last 15 years or so. Established in 2006, I graduated from art school in New York, and not finding my place in the art market and in the many million galleries in New York City, I founded a project called Home Base Project, which is basically an art residency taking place in vacant buildings in the city. It actually began, there's a Polish connection here because it started in Greenpoint in New York, in a very Polish neighborhood, and I come from a Polish family. And this question of home and longing for home really became the central theme. So Home Base Project has traveled in different cities in the world, from New York to Berlin, Jerusalem, and Saitama. And basically it's about creating interconnectedness between artists and local communities. There's a 3-week residency, and then it opens to the public, and the public becomes part of this cultural home. And I want to kind of focus specifically on what happened in Berlin, which is a commemoration project that unfolded on site. In 2010, after 4 projects in New York in different neighborhoods, Homebase was invited to Berlin, actually by the owner of this building here, which is in Pankow, formerly East Berlin, Thulestrasse, and this kind of grayish building was inhabited by a group of artists. And the idea is really to engage questions about society, questions about everyday art and everyday urban living, and the living together on site while creating artwork about home was at the center. And you can see kind of how we created this temporary home in a vacant building. In order to engage the local community, the idea was to reach out to the neighbors using this door hanger and really trying to see how this notion of home can be reflected on through their very kind of in-depth knowledge of the place. So at the end of the Homebase project in Berlin, the last day of the project, 2 neighbors approached us and had a very urgent drive to share some information about the building. And while we always create some kind of research into the past of the site, we were extremely surprised to discover this very contested past of the building. Built in 1895 as a brewery. This is the building that you saw before. You can see this kind of a large industrial complex. And the photograph they brought with them is this one here. In the center is Ignaz Nacher, a Jewish businessman and philanthropist who was the director of Engelhardt Brewery. It was one of the second biggest breweries in Berlin in the 20s. And here they're launching a new beer, a Pilsner, and it's on March 5th, 1907. And this kind of proud businessman, philanthropist, portrait here. You can see also this document of 25 years of management of the brewery with the logo of Engelhardt, which was a black-head angel, kind of affiliated with Ignaz Nacher. So things changed drastically in the 30s when the Nazis expropriated the brewery, and it's one of the biggest cases of Nazi expropriation. And also, of course, a process of Aryanization happens where the black-head angel is now a blonde angel boy. And the tragic story of Ignaz has to do with the fact that he was not only stripped from his wealth, he was imprisoned. The brewery continued to make major income fueling World War II. And he died a year later. He managed to escape jail and died quite, I can say, a broken man with no heirs. So besides the story of Ignaz, which was really major, and also there's no acknowledgement in public space of Ignaz Nacher in Berlin still today. The neighbors continue to reveal the timeline of the building beyond that point. And it's quite interesting because one building captures the whole history of Europe. Being on the east part of Berlin, it became for a short time a communist brewery. And then it was transformed into a Marxist youth hostel, where children grew up to Marxist ideology. And after the fall of the Berlin Wall, it was kind of vacant, and it was randomly squatted. So when this story was revealed, we decided together with the neighbors to do an act of commemoration. And basically what you see here is this kind of reenactment of the original photograph on the same date, March 5th, 2011, so it's 105 years later, in the exact same place. The building is on the left, where artists and beer lovers and neighbors and family members of Ignaz come together facing this historic injustice. And besides the reenactment, sorry, this is the grandnephew of Ignaz who came from Canada. There was the tribute beer, which is basically kind of a performance that happened on site inside the building, which was now our home. And this became Ignaz beer, basically. So instead of the blackhead angel and blonde angel, this is the second redhead that I promised at the beginning. And a beer as a memory, as a work of art, as a celebration of life. So I'm going to quickly try to move forward and mention that all this kind of, a few years after Homebase left the site, one of the neighbors sent me this photograph where this amazing communal project of preservation of memory basically becomes an urban ruin, purchased by another real estate company who built this complex of 400 units. And this question, the question mark is really, what is the role of art and what is the role of Homebase in this case of contributing to gentrification? And how can memory still exist in this rapidly changing urban environment? So just to conclude, 2 commemoration phases were kind of evolving from this. One is a plea to the real estate owner to make a permanent commemoration, which will be next year on the sidewalk of the building. But that might be a little bit boring and kind of standard. There's so many commemorations in Berlin. I think the more interesting aspect is the third phase, where basically provoking the new residents and new homeowners on site to take kind of accountability about the continuity of memory. And this is a proposal that we sent, which is kind of this communal bench in which the whole timeline of the building would be engraved into. And the idea of a communal bench is a place of gathering, of reflection, but but mainly something that really involves civil engagement and is part of everyday life. So finally, just to say that from this examination, a new term kind of emerged, which is called phantom urbanity. Because I have half a minute left, I'll just say that phantom urbanity is kind of larger than the sum of the tendencies I described. And it really has to do with the role of art in the production of the city. So more about that, I hope, later. And thank you. This is the conclusion downstairs in the exhibition where I've been reflecting on these subjects. And this is an artwork and a device for action of rethinking about art in the city, created by me in collaboration with artist Sally Cristal. And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anat, for this. So for whoever is not here with us, I think it's the first cold day in Tel Aviv. So we have two more speakers and we'll keep it brief. So the one before last is Anya Kaupovic. I hope I pronounced it right. She's a music and art performer. And this piece is about music and art remembrance, the case of Warsaw's Music Festival, a site-specific classical music festival realized in the backyards of Warsaw Ghetto. So please, Anya.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear and see you.
Hi. First of all, thank you very much for having me. I feel, after all the previous presentations, that I come from radically different world and different field. I'm a classical music musician, and the Warsaw Music Festival is kind of an answer to different needs. One of the needs is that classical music is very often seen, and people have right to see it this way. That it's marked with some form of escapism, like you enter a very abstract concert hall and you listen to the music of, I don't know, Mozart or Vivaldi. And the music has absolutely no reference to life, to what you're going through, to the context of a city that it played in. So that's the first thing, that we wanted to create a classical music initiative that would have a deep connection with Warsaw and with the local and social context. And so the second thing that comes very often up when people are talking about the remembrance and the Warsaw as a phantom city is the very abstract and weird feeling of guilt. Although we are young and we didn't see the war, we feel almost guilty to live in the city built on graves and to live in the phantom city. And to some artists, not only musicians, this is a strong call for action, to do something about our everyday life experience. Okay. So Warsaw Music Festival is a festival that grew somehow spontaneously. We started in 2017 with my pianist, excellent classical pianist Marek Bracha. I'm very thankful to him because, as you can probably imagine, it's a very, very, very crazy idea to put a piano into a neglected, ruined Warsaw Ghetto remaining backyards. It was very risky on many levels. We didn't know the answer and the response of the local communities. We didn't know if musically these concerts would make sense, like if the acoustics would be good enough or if the weather will be good enough. So it was all risky. And it all started with us migrating from one tenement house to another, and performing flute and piano concept micro recitals. What I think about after listening to previous presentations, when we think about remembrance, maybe automatically we think about big scale and lasting objects. So Warsaw Music is just the contrary, is absolutely not prestigious. It's just a glimpse, it's just a moment when we enter the backyard, and then after 1 hour, it's all tied up and as it never happened. And it's also, as I said, very risky, because just one drop of rain just makes it all impossible to do. So we started just the two of us, and we were really astonished by the response of the local communities and also other artists that volunteered spontaneously to join and to enter these spaces with us. And just the last edition of 2020 and also 21, we had 11 classical and contemporary music concerts and 4 walks in the area of the former Warsaw Ghetto, and a composer's residencies. Now we had already 4 of them. And in each festivals, we have at least 20 artists involved. So what we want to do is to recreate the sound and music of the pre-war Jewish Warsaw in its whole diversity and broad context. So it's not only the music of Polish Jews. Of course, it's maybe the most important. Excellent composers like Nietzsche Weinberg, Alexander Tansman, Zygmunt Kassern, many of them. But it's not only their work, it's also the music they heard, the music they performed as musicians, the music that touched them. So the context is very broad, and sometimes we start a concert with a piece of Johann Sebastian Bach as well. We have 2 paths of our festival. First is just concerts. What is important about the festival? Each concert has specifically designed program, designed specifically for a given location. So if we have a tenement house with its own history, we refer to this history, and this is the goal. And the other thing, we do the walks and try to invite people to get to know their neighborhood. Something about Muranów or Northern District that you perhaps might know is that nowadays in Warsaw, the Central District is a very vivid place, and many people come from different cities, different countries, having really no idea where they live. So sometimes Warsaw Music Festival is first opportunity for them to meet the history through classical music. What is also important, and also going absolutely radically other direction than the image of remembrance as something great and made of marble and steel, is that we do not tell the story of great heroes, of battles. We even don't tell the story of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising or the Warsaw uprising. We tell stories of ordinary people living in these tenement houses. And our experience is that it works very well, especially right now when in Poland we have a problem of raising racism, xenophobia, and also hate. So it works very well for us to tell to the kids the story about other kids living there 80 years ago, to talk to artists about other artists working there and composing or performing in these very houses. So it works very well for us. We work with local communities. We enter backyards, the fascinating space, half private, half public. We need invitation, support, and help of the residents. We listen to their stories and we work with them closely. We enter the backyards with the stories of Polish Jews, both composers, big figures, and also former residents. And we perform and listen. We observe and are observed. And we engage the music into the local context with maximum possible mindfulness and empathy. As you can see, these are the residents and the neighbors and some dogs and some kids. Everybody is very welcome just to come and listen. We want to raise awareness about the identity of the city. We want local authorities to be aware of the need to preserve the tenement houses. We want to make musicians around the world aware of their roots very often. And we want to encourage institutions to know about the humble work that really has a great impact and works really well, just to put classical music out of the concert halls. So as you can see, and the leader composer of the Warsaw Music Festival is Nietzsche Weinberg. You probably heard this name before because in 2019 there was a great premiere of Weinberg's The Passenger opera at the Tel Aviv Opera House, and I had a pleasure to play a chamber music concert there, and I have great memories with that. So I see my time is up, but if you have time, I would like to invite you warmly to listen to the Air Force Strings written in 1942 in Tashkent, when the composer was given the information about the annihilation of the Warsaw Ghetto. You can see the link, but also you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Spotify, or Apple Music and listen to the music of the pre-war Jewish Warsaw.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, so integrating music into memory, I think, is very good because it really touches the senses, like maybe some physical manifest objects don't. But for our last speaker, I would like to invite Irit Cormon-Popper. She's talking to us about the case of Common Views, socially engaged art project in the desert urban landscape of Arad and Kusifa, the Art of Remembrance in light of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Please, Irit.
Thanks. לא, עוד לא? עוד אחד? Okay. So, last and not least, Common Views is a durational, socially engaged art project led by artists David Bahar Perachia and Dan Farberoff. And they explore the concept of environmental reconciliation, which touches on issues of social ecological systems dealing with the relationship of communities sharing a local landscape. The artists employ participatory, site-specific and community-engaged practices in order to lead the social change. They utilize UNESCO Man and Biosphere program as a guideline, presenting potential global solutions for local communities. Although their actions are taking part in a wild cultural phenomenon that has been growing stronger in the last 2 decades, yet their uniqueness lies in their motivation to embrace an alternative way of recommunication and reconciliation that addresses ecological issues as a vehicle for dealing with civic and political issues of site in conflict, as the Israeli-Palestinian one. The artists travel a lot. Farberoff is based in Berlin, and Perachia divides his time between Israel and Italy. But as part of their collaborative strategy, they involved local public and local artists in each one of the project performances. Each time, from a site specificity point of view, they treat the place as a source of inspiration and a platform for action. Since 2019, the project contained 4 phases in various international locations as Israel, Poland, Germany, and preparing next year to South Africa. I'll focus today on 2 case studies that were held in Israel in the desert urban landscape of 2 towns, one of Arad and the other one is Kseife, as you can see on the left side of the slide. So the first phase took place in the town of Arad, as I said, and nearby Bedouin settlements of Bakia Valley, in Hebrew you say Bikat Kanaim. The communities that inhabit the area share a common desert landscape, and yet the existent spatial inequality and the lack of access to resources is evident. One of the main valuable resources on which the artists have chosen to focus is water, by means of touching upon the native desert tradition of water harvesting. They reflect on socio-political issues in the context of a wider global discussion on environment and sustainability, and how, as creative agents, they can use their toolbox and contribute to public awareness and future action. It connects, of course, to the last lecture, but to most of them. Cisterns and dug waters tanks are an ancient phenomenon that had provided for desert dwellers for millennia. Many of the temporary settlements were, and still, located nearby a cistern and relied on rainwater harvesting for all their needs, as the one you can see as Boratin. The Bedouin inhabitants of the valley rely on self-laid, sun-beaten black plastic irrigation pipes which win their way of miles in the desert, bringing precious water from the official Israeli pipeline to the settlements, each controlled by an unofficial stopcock inside a handcrafted locked metal box. Over the years, they gradually deserted the water harvesting practices, with the majority of cisterns becoming neglected. With the effect of climate change and the growing global water crisis coming to the fore in both global and local politics, the need for preserving and learning for time-honored and sustainable traditional approaches to environment and resources is rising in importance. The Art of Remembrance is conducted by means of how the art action, uses personal narratives and communal experiences based on heritage, as in this case, fixing and reusing cisterns, reviving the elders' knowledge to be useful nowadays for the sake of the new generation of Bedouins and Jews alike. In this particular cistern, Boratin, as I said, you can see how the artist carried a participatory action in collaboration with Bedouins and Jews to preserve the drainage channels leading water to the cistern. If renewed, it will be able to attract tourists and hikers and serve as a central point of interest for water resources in the desert culture. The action, as well as the process of learning the historical and cultural background, have led to the formation of small dedicated local community of stakeholders around the idea, and hopefully will continue what the artist began. The main visual expression of the artistic action was shown in the art exhibition at the Arad Contemporary Art Center, which I curated. The collected materials of the acts and research were transformed into site-specific installation, including sculpture, video, and sound, drawings, and photographs, part of which was extended outside the gallery building into the urban public space of the city of Arad. The black plastic water pipes were brought and presented in the urban space. Their symbolic presence outside the real context contributed to the awareness and commemoration of the injustice distribution of water resources between the Bedouin settlements and the Jewish residents of the city. One of the main objects of the exhibition was a rujum, the desert way marker traditionally made of piled up rocks, which transformed by the artist to a minimalist sculptural object made of iron grid, kind of maybe monument, and was clothed in color knitted surfaces created by Bedouins and Jewish women. In this context, the artist seeks to revitalize and reawaken an interest in the native tradition of water harvesting, proposing the creation of cisterns, walking trail linking the town and the settlement. The rujum sculptures are to be placed along the trail and mark the location of the cisterns in the desert. The same structure was reused in the latest phase of the Common View project held in November, just last week, in the Bedouin town of Kseife. A group of women and children created a sculptural dew harvester to be used in the desert garden of a local school. On the basic construction, new materials, knitting cloth and wood were attached. In this sense, the art object has undergone a transformation while keeping the memory of the former object, the rujum in the desert, and also referring to local strategies that were used in the everyday desert life in the past that should be embraced today. Oops. The activity was part of an art and ecology festival, initiated and produced by the artist, which contained various workshops and performances open to the public. The workshops were led by school teachers, educators, and volunteers dealt with desert agriculture and gardening, and were based on traditional local practices, as well as sustainability education regarding the use of water and gray water. One workshop was of particular importance, maybe it's better, the Elder Storytelling Workshop, which brought together Kseife's local seniors in sharing their stories about water, passes, and life in the desert over the years before the modernization of water sources. One of the elders remembered himself at the age of 18 carrying water from a well, a distance of a few kilometers away from his house. He was carrying each time about 20 liters according to the need of the family. The use of a donkey, he recalled, was a new technology for him, which assists in the transfer of a larger amount of water at a time. The festival took place in a white, colorful tent, which was built in collaboration with local community members, children and adults. In the tent gathered participants and guests, children, women, and men together as a symbolic tradition site for Bedouin music performances and coffee. The last project that I will show and conclude through it will be by referring to another tent that was planned and built by the artist in Krakow, Poland. The tent of assembly as a part of the Kumzix Festival of Jewish Art held in the 2021, maybe 1 year ago. It was a temporary tent located on the banks of the Vistula River, which was built as built and dismantled by a group of performers for the 10 days of the festival. They ventured along the Old Jewish Quarter, erecting a modular structure which they took down every evening. They also carried a wooden symbolic box planned and initiated by the artist, which contained components as carpets and cushions and building instructions for the building process of the tent. The public were invited to enter and join in a conversation about place, displacement, and belonging, while listening to collected recorded stories of recently displaced residents of Krakow. It was a durational performance installation exploring resilience, displacements, and nomadism in a time of rising water levels, increasing climate and social ecological pressures on human habitations. So this is the three stories about the Common View project, and I'm looking forward for the next one, maybe in South Africa and maybe next year even. Thank you.
Thank you, Irit. So maybe you can already sit here. So we'll have a conclusion discussion with also our partners from Poland. So Udi, Anat, and Irit, maybe you can join me here. So thank you, first of all, for all the participants. I think it was a very diverse sort of spectrum we had here of what commemoration is all about and how it is performed in Warsaw and how it is performed here in Tel Aviv and in other places. But I think maybe we can go back to the initial questions that were that raised here, for example, what you rose, Kuba, of, you know, how can we refer to commemoration today and why, or if it has to be different than what has been done generations before us, for example, the works of Danny Caravan, Nigel Tumarkin. Do you think it is really a time to think about commemoration in a different way? What is our role as artists, as creators of commemoration sites in this discourse? So, Kuba, if you can start.
Yeah. First of all, I'd like to thank you for being invited here. I remember 2 years ago when we've been discussing about the festival that could take place on the rooftop under the very pergola installation that I was co-designing. This is when we've been talking about the overall crisis of democracy that we are facing, but at the very same time about how interesting historically this moment is. The bulging soup of new possibilities of different constructive or not conflicts that are appearing is something that we can take much inspiration from. One of the important factors here is that when we are talking about commemorization, we have to relate to a notion of Mikhail Bakhtin called addressivity, which is a notion that relates very much to how much the monuments, the commemorization, are reflecting the society. How in what extent they represent the needs of society. And this is when I'm putting something on a table, which is, what if, because we have today so many new players that were invited to appear in public space, to share the space, to negotiate it, what if the commemorization, the memorials, the rituals related to memory would have to be changed and will have to be enlarged, deformalized, and much more open to be representative for different groups of, let's call it city users, inhabitants, interest groups, etc. What if we just say out loud, the 19th century is over. We don't stamp reality with heavy architectural or sculptural objects. We can do tons of things of different type, including music festivals, including procedural or processual, situationistic, action-based. This is the time for us. Yeah, this is the time for different groups that we are in, that we collaborate with, most of us are dealing with local inhabitant groups like you in Lieblinghaus. You are very much embedded in this context, in the context of neighboring houses of White Tel Aviv, but also of very much everyday people.
So Kuba, what you're referring to is sort of a bottom-up sort of commemoration, no? Like where the community is really part of the commemoration itself and not just a physical manifest. I see you both nodding all the time. Perhaps Udi or Irit, you would like to say something as well?
It's a lot to think about it here, and following Kuba, I think, you know, for me it's an interesting thought game to think about the world without monuments. So this is something interesting to try to imagine. Can we even imagine this kind of world without any monuments at all? What would it mean? And I think that I tried to say something. I tried to say something about it in the very beginning. Monuments is places to commemorate, but they are also places that many times fix moments in history that later on are not relevant anymore, or more than that, are troubling. And
also sometimes these monuments are really places that then you don't really want to engage with because they provoke a memory which you don't want to have when you pass through them, no? So this is also what kind of feeling do they evolve?
Right. And I think that in the second part of the 20th century, there's a lot of different kind of actions, from destruction of monuments to counter monuments that weren't mentioned much this evening, but trying to think about different ways of commemorating, and I'm not sure that we found the right solution yet.
Is there one right solution as well? Irit, did you want to say something?
When Kuba was speaking, I thought that maybe we should do most of the monuments in a smaller scales and not so big, so we can intervene and we can, how do you say, make kind of a participation action inside the buildings or inside the memorial sites, and not so like the examples you showed also, Udi, of the square of Rabin. So I think that maybe the thinking about commemoration in the city today has to be with more active manner. I mean, with the residents, with people, with other actions, as maybe the example I showed, or the example of the music in Warsaw. This is my opinion.
So, Anya, really about the music in Warsaw, I think this is, I mean, for us, it's really a great way to think about like the feeling a site like this provokes. Of course, if it's a ghetto or something that has to do with sort of this very dark side of history. So I would want to ask you de facto if you had the chance to speak to the people who took part in those festivals and what kind of resonance had these festivals on sort of the remembrance of the ghetto and you know, the feeling they provoke.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Mostly we have great response and many people come. Of course, old people have some of their own stories to share, some memories. Although the old former residents of this of the tenement houses all died in 1942, but they have some remembrance of rebuilding of Warsaw and all the process that that came after the war. And sometimes we have some kind of indifferent reactions, like the residents that visibly would like not to think about where they live and about the history. And very rarely, but sometimes, we have some kind of aggressive comments or some kind of negativity that we feel. that we have to deal with this. Like, we have to accept the situation that each concert is a kind of confrontation, if we like it or not, even though classical music has no words mostly, and it's very metaphorical language and very calming in a way, you know, it's very nice experience, so to say. But we have to accept the fact that people feel confronted with the history of the place, and we have to give them right to have different reactions. But when I think about the festival as a whole, really most of the participants of the concerts are wonderful, and they feel more connected to their everyday venues after we leave.
Thank you. I want to remind us, I don't know if you have heard the lecture we had about the architect who was actually in charge of the conservation plan of the ghetto of Auschwitz, but he stated one very interesting fact that I think is relevant to our discussion today. He asked if, you know, we have to hold on to material in the physical sense. I mean, if, for example, the shoes in the Auschwitz, if we need to hold on to their substance, or if naturally they decay, and then with them the memory of sort of this phase in history decays as well. I mean, it's a very, very heavy question, and I'm asking us, but I still think that if we talk about commemoration, we also have to really think about the physical aspect of what we're holding on to. And I think that those aspects really came through with Centrala and the Memoryscape, that you were really trying to look at those you know, historical artifacts as something that is just there and that you can build upon. So what is for you, the couple of Centrala, maybe the importance of these artifacts that you really dug out, and how do they rely to memory of this sort of ghetto today?
Hello?
Yes,
Hello?
we can hear you. Hi.
Okay. In fact, we created that Memoryscape map because few years ago, we thought that ephemeral way of like, what's the title of this meeting?
Remembrance.
Yeah, thank you. Is a good way to deal with the memory in this post-catastrophic city. But then what happened? One group started to build up the hard monuments in the middle of our city, and they want the common imaginary. They appropriated the symbols connected to the ghetto appraisal. They built up the monument to the Warsaw appraisal with using these artificial bricks, the manipulated symbolism, and now they shifted completely the cloud of references in that city. And before, the small monument of the kid was a place where parents were sharing the reflection that it's wonderful that their kids don't
have to fight the war.
Yeah, and now the parents are coming with the tattoo on their bodies with the same figurine, because this is how the understanding of the duty of the patriotism was shifted by these new classical 19th century monuments in the middle of our space. So, you know, this debate about if this ephemeral way of dealing with the past, the case of Warsaw is you have to put the stone on it.
That sounded more like the Cuba kind of like, you know, topic slash answer. No, but when it comes to instead like a little bit more like our practice with the materiality, and we like to call it sort of like the metabolism of the city, or like this layering, and for what my personal perspective, how that's connected with our practice and how we are approaching the city, is establishing like a sort of like looking at memory, looking at the past with this idea of continuity, in which like our city constantly transforms, and nothing actually really disappears, but transmutates, and it's lived through what you experience today, and what you make out of it. So this is why we show the river of Warsaw, or one of the most frequented parks, because this is like the physical manifestation of our memory. And now and the question for us is much more how we can kind of transmit this to the future. Like our practice is very much future oriented, so somehow we are trying to kind of connect this materiality to how we can envision the Warsaw of tomorrow. So how this materiality will project Warsaw into the
Yes, I love the term transmutate, and I also like the term phantom urbanity, and maybe we can try and see if there is a connection between those two terms, because yeah, our culture evolves, and the landscape evolves as well. And maybe this is a question to you, Annette. Where do you find that in your work as an artist you can help or somehow manifest a sort of memory that you, as the artist or as the curator, would want to leave in a space like you showed, which has nothing to do at all with the sort of original building that was there? No, like, how do you take a memory from one generation to the next without having it be some sort of artificial?
Is this working? Okay. I very much connect to what has been said by Centrala, and I think it's important to emphasize this kind of maybe more progressive thinking about memory, not as nostalgic, but really as informing the future. And I think that we're also moving from facing erasure of memories by power structures and countering that by insisting on this kind of continuity is really essential, not only of communities that are kind of more liminal, but in general, creating some kind of multi-layered experience. And I think there's this kind of narrative that came up about this dematerialization. If we saw the steel and like all of this kind of rubbish taken from memorials and used, how can memory be constructed more in terms of constellations of communities? And just to conclude, I think that there's something about two aspects. One is about memory as a celebration of life and of the everyday. And the second thing is really the context of the built environment, looking at the memory as part of something larger. And I think those are the two aspects.
Yes, I think that's very true. And I think also that it's nice that what you're doing is not coming up from really the regulators or sort of narrative that a nation wants to tell, but rather really from sort of a research that is done in the field. And maybe, Beata, also for you, the question, do you think that the architect that has built Muranov up again, was he acting sort of from his artistic or architectural aspirations, or was it something governmental to really take the ruins and work with them? Is it some sort of, because I think that's, I mean, we're always here, we're in the White City dealing with modernism and avant-garde, and I think this sort of solution that was done there is quite interesting, because it really evolves a sort of a modernistic approach to architecture, but still in a very refined way, also uses sort of these layers of the past. And I really wanted to understand if he was meaning for the site to be some sort of a continuation of these social structures that live there and their part in the commemoration, or was it just like, you know, the answer of the problem of the hour of giving housing solutions?
I think there were both. It's much more complicated in a way, because Lahert and his colleagues were also part of the broadened circle of artists and also social activists who wanted to build social housing and rebuild Warsaw in a totally different way. And the same, and some people from that group were in the government at the time, like Bolesław Bierut, the first communist president of Warsaw. So they knew each other, they worked together before the war as well. So I think it was political on one side, and also it was a part of the of their view of Warsaw. Like to be, it was it's a paradox, because those architects were not happy, of course, that Warsaw was so destroyed during the war, but on the other hand, it was a kind of gift for them, because they could finally build like on the white sheet of paper. And of course, it was not a white sheet of paper. There was ruins and there were human remains. It was a huge cemetery. But in some sorts, even during the war, they were planning to build something there. So it was like political on one kind, but on the other hand, it was his own like memory projects, also because he was involved in helping his Jewish friends during the war, also fellow architects, and he was really aware of what had happened there and in that area. And also he was, on the other side, he was experimenting a lot before the war, also with the material. So with concrete, with rubble, it was something kind of like artistic experiment for him, as well as a memory project.
Good. You mentioned social activism. So is Irit, is this what the projects were really doing? Is this social activism?
It's kind of social activism.
It's kind of social. It's also kind of a garden city. It's kind of neighborhood unit principle, residential area. Because and also it was meant to be the first, which also refers somehow to Israeli history, because it was meant to be the first district for workers, like working class district for the people who used to live, like pioneers who built up Warsaw, and before the war. Working class lived not in the central areas of Warsaw. So it was like the working class, of course it was also propaganda, but the working class had to enter the city center. And so it's now it's also a very interesting social mixture. But the most interesting thing, I think, is how the people who live there doesn't mind where they come from, deal with the fact that they are part of this monumental project and also the memory project. They are physically a part of it.
So yes, back to you, Irit. So social activism. So do you find that is sort of the way that you are dealing with commemoration, or do you find it is rather maybe an art of remembrance? So how would you define the work that you're doing, and what kind of impact? Because I see you're very passionate about it, and you're very passionate about doing more of it. So it must have been some sort of an enlightening experience that you can give a community sort of, a platform for remembrance, with them also being an active part in it. So what is your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it was fascinating for me because it came right after I finished my research, and then I jumped into the practice. And it's not always as you read about it or as you think it's going to be, because you have to connect with people, and you have different views and different perspectives, and you need to manage everything between them, between the artists that participate in the project, between the stakeholders and the management and everything. And I think, yeah, it's kind of activism, because we did what we could do in this moment, in this specific moment. And then after a few maybe years, or like in Anat's case, something happened, and then you have to do again. And you give something to the community, to the place, and they need to take it from there.
Yes, I think it's a very nice way to end our speech or our venue for today, because I think that we really try as creators, as artists, as architects, to hold on to do something that lasts, to create something that we think might linger on to future generations. But maybe we have to have the sort of humble experience here and to say that we can only do what we can do, and hope for the impact, the best impact that we can have in order to help maybe communities that don't get their voice out, and minorities to also hold their sort of remembering history. But in the end of the day, as we said, Centrale, you said it so nice. How did you say? I forgot the decay of the sort of physical aspect. Dematerialization? No, we said transmutation. Yes, thank you. So, yeah, I would like to thank everybody that took part in this event today. And I hope this will also be an event to remember, and that we can maybe also have an impact on people who plan and commemorate spaces, and maybe help them think about new ways and methodologies to let the voices of what we want to remember be heard. So, have a nice evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. And we hope to see you Polish people here in Tel Aviv, and vice versa. We hope to visit all the wonderful projects you're doing there. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.